I should have known better than to push Duke through that canyon country in late September. The sun beat down on us like a blacksmith's hammer on an anvil, and the red rock walls on either side trapped the heat until it felt like we were riding through the mouth of hell itself. But I'd been running for so long that stopping felt more dangerous than pressing forward, even when every instinct told me the horse was reaching his limit. Duke had been with me for 8 years. I bought him off a ranch hand in Abilene when he was just a 3-year-old, barely broken, with a wild streak that reminded me of myself. We had covered thousands of miles together, from the cattle trails of Texas to the mountain passes of Colorado, always moving, always one step ahead of whatever ghosts I was trying to outrun. He was a big bay gelding with a white star on his forehead and 3 white socks, strong as an ox and twice as stubborn. He had never let me down. Until that afternoon in the canyons, I felt him stumble first, just a slight hitch in his gait that any lesser horseman might have missed. I pulled back on the reins immediately, bringing him to a walk, but the damage was already done. His breathing came in labored gasps, his sides heaving like bellows. Foam collected at the corners of his mouth and along the edges of the bit. His neck was dark with sweat that had nothing to do with just exertion and everything to do with exhaustion that ran bone deep. "Easy, boy," I said, dismounting quickly and running my hand along his neck. His coat was hot enough to burn, and when I lifted his lip to check his gums, they were tacky and pale. Heat exhaustion, maybe worse. I had pushed him too hard, too fast, through country that demanded respect and patience. The realization hit me like a fist to the gut. I had been so focused on my own demons that I had forgotten to take care of the one living thing that depended on me completely. I looked around at the canyon walls rising 200 feet on either side, narrow enough that the afternoon sun only touched the sandy bottom for a few hours each day. No water in sight, no shade to speak of, just endless red rock and scattered juniper trees that looked as thirsty as we were. My canteen was nearly empty, maybe a cup of water left, and Duke needed it more than I did. I poured the last of my water into my hat and held it up to Duke's mouth. He drank greedily, his tongue lapping at the leather crown until every drop was gone. It wasn't nearly enough, I knew that. He knew that, but it was all I had to give. "We'll find water," I told him, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. "Just got to keep moving, find a way out of these canyons." But Duke's legs were trembling now, the muscles in his shoulders twitching with each labored breath. I had seen horses go down from heat exhaustion before, watched them collapse and never get back up. The thought of losing Duke, of watching him die because of my own recklessness, made something twist in my chest that felt uncomfortably close to panic. I tried to lead him forward, taking it slow, but after maybe 50 yards, his front legs buckled. He went down on his knees first, then rolled onto his side with a groan that sounded almost human in its despair. His eyes were wide, showing white around the edges, and his breathing came in short, rapid bursts that I knew meant he was in serious trouble. I dropped to my knees beside him, one hand on his neck, feeling his heart hammering beneath my palm like it was trying to break free of his chest. "Don't you quit on me, Duke," I said, hearing the desperation in my own voice. "Don't you dare quit." But horses don't understand desperation, and they don't respond to pleading. Duke's eyes started to glaze over, his breathing becoming more shallow, and I realized with a sick certainty that I was about to lose him. Out here, miles from anywhere, with no water and no help, I was going to watch my horse die, and then I would probably follow him, because walking out of these canyons on foot with no water was just a slower way of dying. I had survived range wars and winter blizzards. I had been shot twice, stabbed once, and thrown from horses more times than I could count. I had outlived friends and enemies alike, always managing to slip away before the consequences of my choices could catch up with me. But sitting there in that canyon with Duke dying beside me, I finally understood what it meant to reach the end of the trail. That was when I heard the hoofbeats. At first I thought it was my imagination, or maybe the sound of my own pulse pounding in my ears, but then I heard it again, distinct and rhythmic, echoing off the canyon walls from somewhere up ahead. I reached for the Winchester rifle in my saddle scabbard, old instincts taking over even in the midst of crisis. Out here, an approaching rider could be salvation or death, and I had learned long ago not to trust to luck when it came to strangers. The rider came around a bend in the canyon about 100 yards ahead, mounted on a paint horse that moved with the easy confidence of an animal that knew this country well. As the figure drew closer, I could make out more details. A woman, wearing a man's work shirt and split riding skirt with a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the sun. She rode like she had been born in the saddle, one hand loose on the reins and the other resting on her thigh, completely at ease despite the brutal heat and the treacherous footing. She reined in about 20 feet away, her eyes taking in the scene, me kneeling beside my collapsed horse, dust and desperation written all over both of us. For a long moment she just sat there, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Then she dismounted in one fluid motion and walked toward us, pulling a canteen from her saddle as she came. "That horse needs water," she said. It wasn't a question. "I know that," I replied, hearing the edge in my own voice. "I wouldn't be sitting here if I had any to give him." She knelt on Duke's other side, uncapped her canteen, and began pouring water into her cupped hand, letting him lap it up slowly. Her movements were efficient and practiced, someone who had tended to animals her whole life and knew exactly what needed to be done. "You pushed him too hard," she said, still not looking at me. "This country will kill a horse quick if you don't respect it." "I didn't ask for a lecture," I said, though the words came out with less heat than I intended. She was right, after all, and we both knew it. "No, I don't suppose you did." She poured more water for Duke, patient and methodical. "But facts don't much care whether you asked for them or not. Question is, do you want your horse to live?" "Of course I do." "Then stop being proud and start listening." She finally looked up at me, and I got my first clear view of her face beneath the hat brim. She was maybe 40, with sun-weathered skin and lines around her eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into harsh light and harder circumstances. But her eyes were sharp and clear, a grey-blue color like storm clouds over the mountains, and they held an intelligence and strength that made me feel suddenly foolish for my earlier hostility. "My ranch is about 2 miles from here," she continued. "Hidden valley, good water, shade. If we can get your horse on his feet and moving slow, I can get him there. But we need to do it now before the sun gets any higher." "Why would you help me?" I asked. "Because in my experience, nobody did something for nothing, especially not for a stranger." A slight smile touched her lips, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Maybe I got my reasons. Or maybe I just don't like watching animals suffer when I can do something about it. Does it matter?" I thought about that for a moment, then shook my head. "I suppose it doesn't. Not right now." "Good. Then let's get moving." Over the next 20 minutes, she proved herself to be one of the most capable people I had ever encountered. She knew exactly how to coax Duke back onto his feet, speaking to him in a low, steady voice, while we both heaved against his weight. Once he was up, she tied his lead rope to her saddle horn and set off at a pace so slow it barely qualified as walking, making sure Duke never had to exert himself more than absolutely necessary. I walked alongside Duke, one hand on his neck, feeling every labored step, and wondering if he would make it those 2 miles she had promised. The sun climbed higher, turning the canyon into an oven, and sweat poured down my face and back until my shirt was soaked through. But the woman on the paint horse never faltered, never complained, just kept moving forward with a determination that was almost hypnotic in its steadiness. We rounded another bend, and suddenly the canyon opened up into a hidden valley that took my breath away. It was maybe half a mile across, surrounded on all sides by sheer rock walls that created a natural fortress. A creek ran through the center, lined with cottonwood trees that provided blessed shade, and beyond the creek I could see a ranch house, barn, and several outbuildings that looked well maintained despite their isolation. "Welcome to Callahan Ranch," the woman said, the first word she had spoken since we started moving. "My name's Martha Callahan. That creek there is spring-fed, runs year-round, and it's cold enough to make your teeth ache. Your horse drinks too fast, and he'll colic, so we'll have to pace him." She led us down to the creek and let Duke drink in small amounts, pulling him away every few swallows, despite his protests. I could see the wisdom in it, even if Duke couldn't. After about 10 minutes of this careful watering, she led us to the barn, which was larger than I had expected and surprisingly well built for such a remote location. Inside, the barn was dim and cool, a welcome relief from the punishing sun. She showed me to a large stall with deep bedding and a water trough, then helped me unsaddle Duke and get him settled. His breathing had slowed somewhat, though he was still clearly exhausted, and when I ran my hands over his legs I could feel the heat in his tendons that worried me. "He'll need a few days of rest at minimum," Martha said, seeming to read my thoughts. "Maybe longer. That kind of exhaustion doesn't heal overnight." "I'm grateful for your help," I said, meaning it. "I can pay you for his keep and for whatever water we use." She shook her head. "I'm not looking for money, but I might be looking for something else if you're of a mind to listen to a proposition." There it was, the reason for her help. I should have known it was coming. "What kind of proposition?" "The kind that benefits us both, if you're the man I think you are." She gestured toward the barn door. "Come on up to the house. You look like you could use some food and water yourself, and we can talk business once you've had a chance to get out of the heat." I followed her across the yard, my legs feeling strange and unsteady after the long walk through the canyon. The ranch house was built of adobe and timber, one story with a deep porch that wrapped around two sides. It was clear someone had put considerable thought and effort into its construction. The walls were thick enough to keep out both heat and cold. The windows were positioned to catch the cross breeze, and the whole structure had the solid, permanent look of something built to last. As we approached the porch, I heard voices from inside the house, young and boisterous, followed by the unmistakable sound of something crashing to the floor. Martha's jaw tightened, and she quickened her pace, taking the porch steps 2 at a time and throwing open the front door with enough force to make it bang against the interior wall. "Caleb, Jesse, Thomas!" Her voice cracked through the house like a bullwhip. "What in God's name is going on in here?" I stepped into the doorway behind her and got my first look at the reason for her proposition. 3 boys stood frozen in the middle of what had once been a tidy kitchen, surrounded by the wreckage of what appeared to have been either a fight or some kind of ill-conceived indoor activity. The oldest, a tall, gangly youth with shaggy dark hair and his father's build, held a broom handle like a sword. The middle boy, shorter but stockier, had a pot lid as a shield. The youngest stood off to the side looking guilty but defiant, next to an overturned chair and a shattered dish. "He started it," the oldest boy said, pointing the broom handle at his brother. "He said I was afraid to—" "I don't care who started it," Martha interrupted, her voice cold as January ice. "I care that I left you boys alone for 2 hours, and I come back to find my kitchen destroyed and you 3 acting like animals. Is this how your father would want you behaving?" The mention of their father had an immediate effect. All 3 boys went quiet, their faces showing a mix of shame and something else, a flash of anger or pain, maybe both. The oldest boy lowered the broom handle, his jaw working like he wanted to say something, but couldn't quite find the words. "Clean this up," Martha said, her voice softer now but no less firm. "All of it, every broken dish, every piece of whatever this mess is. And then the 3 of you are going to sit down and have a conversation about what it means to act like men instead of wild animals." She turned back to me, and I could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of carrying something too heavy for one person to bear alone. "This is what I was talking about," she said quietly, so the boys couldn't hear. "This is the proposition." I looked at the 3 boys, then back at Martha, and finally began to understand what she was asking of me. It wasn't about money or labor or anything as simple as that. She was asking me to help her save her sons from themselves, to teach them things she couldn't teach them alone, to give them something that had died with their father. And despite every instinct that told me to mount up and ride away as soon as Duke was healthy enough to carry me, despite the voice in my head that said getting involved with other people's problems was a sure way to end up buried in a shallow grave, I heard myself say, "Let's talk." We left the boys to their cleaning and walked back outside, settling into chairs on the porch, where we could see the barn and keep an eye on Duke. Martha brought out water and cold biscuits left over from breakfast, and for a few minutes we just sat there, eating and drinking and letting the silence stretch between us. Finally, Martha spoke. "My husband was killed 5 years ago. Outlaws hit a bank in Cedar Springs, about 30 miles from here. He was there buying supplies, wrong place at the wrong time. Took a bullet in the crossfire when he tried to protect a woman and her child." She stared out at the valley, her voice steady but distant. "They brought him home wrapped in canvas, and I've been trying to hold this place together ever since." "That's a hard burden to carry alone," I said, because it was true and because I didn't know what else to say. The boys were 12, 10, and 8 when it happened. Caleb, that's the oldest, he took it the hardest. Started acting out, fighting with his brothers, challenging me on every decision. Jesse, the middle one, he just went quiet, like he was holding everything inside where nobody could see it. And Thomas, the youngest, she trailed off, shaking her head. "Thomas doesn't hardly remember his father except in bits and pieces. Sometimes I think that's worse than the other 2, not even having clear memories to hold on to." "What exactly are you asking me to do?" I asked, though I was starting to have a pretty good idea. "I'm asking you to stay. A month, maybe 2, however long it takes to teach my boys what they need to know to survive in this world. How to work a ranch properly, how to handle themselves in a fight, how to think before they act instead of just tearing through life like bulls in a china shop." She looked at me directly, those storm cloud eyes holding mine. "I'm asking you to teach them how to be men, because that's something I can't do no matter how hard I try." "That's a tall order," I said carefully. And you don't know anything about me. I could be an outlaw, a drifter, someone not worth trusting around your sons. Could be, she agreed, but I don't think you are. I saw how you were with your horse, the way you talked to him, the care you took even when you were half dead from heat yourself. A man who treats his horse like that, who carries that kind of guilt when he makes a mistake, that's not a bad man. Maybe not a perfect one, but good enough for what I need. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that she was putting her faith in someone who had spent 20 years running from every responsibility and relationship that tried to tie him down. I wanted to explain that I was the last person who should be teaching anyone anything, least of all how to be a decent human being. But looking out at that hidden valley, with its cold creek and solid buildings and the promise of something like peace, I found I couldn't quite form the words to refuse her. "I'll stay until my horse is healed," I said finally. "After that we'll see." Martha nodded like this was exactly the answer she had expected. "That's good enough for now. We'll start tomorrow, once you've had a chance to rest. But I'll warn you, those boys aren't going to make it easy. They've gotten used to doing things their own way, and they're going to push back hard against anyone trying to change that." "I've broken wild horses," I said. "Can't be that much different." Martha laughed, short and sharp. "If you believe that, you're in for a surprise, but we'll see. Rooms ready in the bunkhouse, clean bedding and a lamp. Supper's at 6, and I expect you at the table." She stood up, brushing biscuit crumbs from her skirt. "And just so we're clear, you hurt one of my boys, disrespect me in my own house, or cause trouble beyond what I'm willing to tolerate, and I'll run you off this ranch so fast you'll think a tornado hit you." "We understood. We're understood." "Good." She headed for the door, then paused. "Thank you. For saying yes, I mean. I know it's not easy taking on someone else's problems." "I haven't said yes yet," I reminded her. "Just said I'd stay until Duke was healed. That's the same thing, and we both know it." She smiled then, a real smile that transformed her whole face and reminded me that she was still young enough to have hope in this hard world. "Welcome to Callahan Ranch, stranger. Something tells me you've been looking for this place a lot longer than just today." She went inside, leaving me alone on the porch with my thoughts and the sound of the creek running through the valley. I thought about Duke in the barn, about the 3 wild boys in the house, about Martha Callahan and her impossible request. I thought about the ghosts I had been running from, the mistakes I had made, the people I had failed. And for the first time in 20 years, I wondered if maybe it was time to stop running and start facing whatever came next, right here in this hidden canyon, where nobody could find me unless they knew exactly where to look. The sun was starting to set, painting the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson, and somewhere in the house I could hear the boys arguing about whose fault the mess had been. It should have made me want to saddle up and ride out. Consequences be damned. Instead, it made me think that maybe, just maybe, I had finally found something worth staying for. I woke before dawn, the way I had every morning for the past 20 years. Old habits die hard, and the habit of waking when it was still dark enough to slip away unnoticed had kept me alive more than once. The bunkhouse was simple but clean, just like Martha had promised. A narrow bed with a corn husk mattress, a small table with a wash basin, and a window that looked out toward the barn where Duke was recovering. The air was cold enough to see my breath, a reminder that September in canyon country meant warm days and frigid nights. I dressed quickly, pulling on my worn denim pants and the shirt I had washed in the creek the night before. My boots were scuffed and dusty from years of use, but they were still solid, and that was what mattered. I walked to the barn first, needing to check on Duke before anything else. The morning was so quiet, I could hear my own footsteps crunching on the gravel path, and overhead the stars were just beginning to fade, as the eastern sky turned from black to deep purple. In the barn, Duke was standing in his stall, which was a good sign. He nickered softly when he saw me, and I spent a few minutes running my hands over his legs, checking for heat or swelling. He was better than yesterday, no question about it. The rest and water had done him good, but he still needed more time before he could carry me anywhere. I forked fresh hay into his manger and made sure his water trough was full, then stood there for a moment with my hand on his neck, feeling the solid warmth of him and thinking about what lay ahead. "You getting soft on me, Duke?" I said quietly. "Letting me get pulled into other people's problems when we should be moving on?" Duke just blew through his nostrils and went back to eating hay, which I figured was as much of an answer as I was going to get. I heard footsteps outside the barn and turned to see Caleb, the oldest boy, carrying a bucket toward the well. He stopped when he saw me, his body language going immediately defensive, shoulders hunching up and eyes narrowing like he expected trouble. "Morning," I said. keeping my voice neutral. "Morning," he muttered back, not quite meeting my eyes. He was maybe 17, tall and thin in that awkward way boys get when they shoot up fast and haven't quite grown into their frames yet. His hair was dark and shaggy, hanging down past his collar, and he had his father's strong jaw but his mother's sharp eyes. "You always up this early?" I asked. "Ma says the animals don't care what time you want to sleep in. They need tending, so you tend them." He shifted the bucket from one hand to the other. "I got chores to do." "I'm sure you do. Your mother mentioned you might need some help learning how to do them properly." That got a reaction. Caleb's head snapped up, his eyes flashing with anger. "I know how to do my chores, been doing them for 5 years without any help from strangers." "That so?" I walked over to the well where Caleb was standing and looked down into the bucket he had just filled. The water was cloudy with sediment and debris, clearly drawn too fast without letting it settle first. "Your livestock drinking this?" "It's water, ain't it?" "It's dirty water. You draw from the well too fast. You pull up all the sediment from the bottom. Livestock drinking this are going to end up with stomach troubles, which means they won't gain weight properly, which means your mother loses money when it comes time to sell." I took the bucket from him, dumped it out and showed him how to lower the bucket slowly and let it fill at its own pace. When I brought it back up, the water was clear and clean. Caleb stared at the bucket, his jaw working like he wanted to argue but couldn't quite figure out what to argue about. Finally, he just grabbed the bucket back from me and said, "I got it now." "I'm sure you do." I watched him stalk off toward the chicken coop, his back rigid with wounded pride, and thought about how Martha had warned me the boys would push back. She hadn't been exaggerating. By the time the sun was fully up, I had checked on Duke again and walked the perimeter of the ranch yard, getting a sense of the layout and what kind of work needed doing. The place was well maintained, but clearly suffering from lack of manpower. Fences that needed mending, gates that hung crooked on their hinges, a water trough with a slow leak that was wasting precious water with every passing hour. Martha called everyone to breakfast at 6:30, and I walked up to the house with my hat in my hand, suddenly conscious of how long it had been since I had sat at a family table. The kitchen was warm and smelled like biscuits and bacon, and Martha was moving between the stove and the table with the efficient grace of a woman who had cooked 1,000 meals and would cook 1,000 more. The 3 boys were already seated, Caleb at one end of the table and the 2 younger ones on either side. They all looked up when I walked in, their expressions ranging from suspicious to curious to openly hostile. "Boys, this is—" Martha paused, realizing she had never actually asked my name. "I'm sorry, I don't think we ever got properly introduced." "Name's Daniel Cooper," I said, settling into the empty chair across from Caleb. "Most people just call me Cooper." "Well, Mr. Cooper, these are my sons. Caleb you've met. This is Jesse." She gestured to the middle boy, who was shorter and stockier than his older brother, with lighter hair and a serious expression that made him look older than his 15 years. "And this is Thomas." The youngest was small for 13, with a mop of sandy hair and freckles across his nose, and he was the only one who smiled when Martha said his name. "Pleased to meet you all," I said, though I wasn't sure if that was true or not yet. "Ma says you're going to be staying here for a while," Caleb said, his voice challenging. "Says you're going to teach us how to run the ranch proper." "That's right. We already know how to run the ranch. We've been doing it just fine without any help." Martha set a platter of biscuits down on the table with enough force to make everyone jump. "Caleb James Callahan, you will mind your manners at this table or you will excuse yourself and go without breakfast. Is that understood?" Caleb's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Breakfast was a tense affair, with everyone eating in silence except for the occasional request to pass the butter or the bacon. I watched the boys, trying to get a read on each of them. Caleb was clearly the leader, the one the others looked to, and he was also the angriest. Jesse was quieter, watching everything but saying nothing, and there was something calculating in his eyes that made me think he was smarter than he let on. Thomas seemed the most open, glancing at me with undisguised curiosity whenever he thought I wasn't looking. After breakfast, Martha stood up and said, "Mr. Cooper, I'd appreciate it if you'd take the boys out and show them how you'd like things done around here. I've got washing to do, and I'd rather not have them underfoot." "Be happy to." I pushed back from the table and looked at the 3 boys. "Grab your hats and meet me by the barn in 5 minutes. Caleb looked like he wanted to argue, but one glance at his mother's face convinced him otherwise. The 3 boys filed out, and I heard them muttering to each other as soon as they were out of earshot. Martha caught my eye and gave me a small, apologetic smile. "They're good boys," she said, "just lost and angry, and not sure what to do with all of it." "I know the feeling." I said, surprising myself with the admission. When I got to the barn, all three boys were waiting, leaning against the fence with their arms crossed and identical expressions of resentment on their faces. Looking at them standing there together, united in their suspicion of me, I realized just how hard this was going to be. "All right," I said, keeping my voice level and matter-of-fact. "Your mother asked me to help teach you how to run this ranch properly. And now I'm not saying you don't know anything. I'm sure you've learned plenty over the years, but there's always room to learn more, and there are some things that maybe got overlooked without your father here to show you." "Don't talk about our father," Caleb said, his voice low and dangerous. "You didn't know him, and you got no right." "You're right, I didn't know him, but I know what it's like to grow up without one, and I know what it's like to have to figure everything out on your own. So I'm not here to replace your father or pretend I'm anything I'm not. I'm just here to help if you'll let me." That seemed to take some of the wind out of Caleb's sails. He looked at his brothers, then back at me, and some of the hardness in his eyes softened just a fraction. "What do you want us to do?" "I want to see how you handle the morning chores. Show me your routine, and I'll watch and offer suggestions where it makes sense." "That fair?" Jesse spoke up for the first time, his voice quiet but steady. "That's fair enough." Over the next 2 hours, I watched the boys work and tried not to wince at everything they were doing wrong. It wasn't that they were lazy, far from it. They worked hard, throwing themselves into each task with determination if not skill. But they had clearly taught themselves through trial and error, with no one to show them the efficient way to do things, or explain why certain methods worked better than others. Caleb mucked out the stalls by throwing the dirty straw everywhere, and then spending twice as long cleaning up his mess. Jesse fed the horses too much hay at once, which meant half of it ended up trampled on the floor and wasted. Thomas tried to carry 2 heavy feed buckets at once, and ended up spilling both of them, then getting frustrated and kicking one of the buckets across the barn. I let them finish before I said anything, then called them all together near the barn doors where the morning light was streaming in. "All right, here's what I saw. You work hard, all 3 of you, and that's the most important thing. But you're making your work harder than it needs to be, and you're wasting time and resources in the process." I held up a hand when Caleb started to protest. "I'm not criticizing. I'm just pointing out what could be better. You want to hear it or not?" The boys exchanged glances. Then Caleb nodded slowly. "All right, we'll listen." I spent the next hour showing them better ways to do the chores they had just finished. I showed Caleb how to muck a stall efficiently, scooping from the back to the front, and using the pitchfork like a lever instead of just muscle. I taught Jesse how to portion out hay properly, giving each horse just enough for their size and activity level. And I spent extra time with Thomas, showing him how to carry heavy loads using his legs instead of his back, and how to pace himself instead of trying to do everything at once. Thomas was the quickest learner, soaking up every word like dry ground after rain. Jesse was more cautious, testing each new method before committing to it, but once he saw that it worked, he was all in. Caleb was the hardest, questioning every suggestion and arguing about why his way was just as good. But even he couldn't deny the results when we finished the same chores in half the time with half the effort. By mid-morning, we had moved on to fence repair, and I was showing them how to properly set a post when Jesse asked, "Where'd you learn all this?" "Ranch in Wyoming when I was about your age," I said, tamping dirt around the post base. Old man who owned it was strict as hell but fair, and he didn't tolerate sloppy work. Taught me that if you're going to do something, you might as well do it right the first time. "What happened to him?" Thomas asked. "He died. Ranch got sold off and I moved on." I didn't elaborate, and something in my tone must have warned them not to push for more details. We worked through the heat of the day, stopping only for a quick lunch that Martha brought out to us. The boys were starting to loosen up a little, asking more questions and arguing less, and I could see them beginning to understand that maybe I wasn't there to judge them or replace their father, but simply to teach them things they needed to know. Late in the afternoon, I had them practice with the lariat, showing them how to build a proper loop and throw it with accuracy. Caleb was terrible at it, getting frustrated and throwing harder instead of more carefully. Jesse was methodical, adjusting his technique with each throw until he could hit the post we were aiming at about half the time. But Thomas was a natural, his throws smooth and accurate almost from the start. "How'd you get so good at this?" Caleb demanded, watching his youngest brother rope the post 3 times in a row. Thomas shrugged, looking embarrassed by the attention. "I don't know. Just makes sense, I guess." "It's because you're not trying so hard," I said. "Your brothers are thinking too much about what they're doing. You're just letting it happen. That's a gift, Thomas. Don't waste it." The boy's face lit up with the first genuine smile I had seen from any of them, and I felt something shift in my chest. It had been a long time since anyone had looked at me like I had given them something valuable. We finished up the day's work and headed back to the barn to clean up before supper. As we were washing our hands at the pump, Caleb said, "Tomorrow can you show us how to shoot? Pa had a rifle, but Ma keeps it locked up and won't let us touch it." "That's because she's afraid you'll shoot each other or yourselves," I said bluntly. "But if she's willing, I can teach you proper gun safety and marksmanship. It's something every man in this country needs to know." "I'm willing." We all turned to see Martha standing on the porch, her arms crossed but her expression thoughtful. "If you're going to teach them, do it right. The last thing I need is one of my boys hurt because they thought they knew more than they did." "I'll be careful with them," I promised. That evening after supper, we all sat on the porch in the cooling air, watching the stars come out over the canyon walls. Martha was mending a shirt, her needle flashing in the lamplight from the window. The boys were sprawled on the porch steps, tired from the long day but not quite ready to go to bed. "Mr. Cooper," Thomas said quietly. "Yes? Are you really going to stay, or are you going to leave as soon as your horse is better?" It was the question I had been asking myself all day, and I still didn't have a good answer for it. I looked at the three boys, at Martha with her steady hands and strong back, at the hidden valley that had become something like a refuge. I thought about Duke in the barn, about all the miles we had covered together, about all the reasons I had for keeping moving. And I thought about how Thomas had smiled when I told him he had a gift for roping, how Jessie had thanked me quietly for showing him a better way to do things, how even Caleb had softened just a little by the end of the day. "I'll stay for a while," I heard myself say, "long enough to teach you what you need to know. After that, we'll see." Martha looked up from her mending and caught my eye, and in that moment I understood that she had known all along I would stay. Maybe she had known it before I did, seen something in me that I couldn't see in myself. "That's good enough," she said softly. "For now, that's good enough." Later that night, lying in my bunk and listening to the coyotes singing in the distance, I wondered what I had gotten myself into. I had spent 20 years avoiding exactly this kind of situation, settling down, getting attached, letting people depend on me. Every time I had tried it before, something had gone wrong. People had gotten hurt, or I had disappointed them, or circumstances had forced me to leave before I was ready. But something was different here. Maybe it was the hidden valley, cut off from the rest of the world by sheer rock walls. Maybe it was Martha, with her strength and determination and refusal to give up on her sons. Or maybe it was the boys themselves, wild and damaged, and desperately in need of someone to show them that there was still good in the world if they knew where to look for it. Whatever it was, I found myself thinking about the next day's work instead of the next town down the trail. I found myself planning lessons instead of escape routes. And when I finally drifted off to sleep, I dreamed not of the places I had left behind, but of the fence posts we would set tomorrow, and the shots the boys would learn to fire straight and true. For the first time in 20 years, I was thinking about building something instead of running from it, and that terrified me more than anything I had faced on the trail. But I was still here, still willing to try, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start with. The first real trouble came 2 weeks into my stay at Callahan Ranch, on a gray morning when the wind carried the smell of coming rain down from the mountains. I should have seen it building. The tension between Caleb and me had been growing steadily, a slow simmer that was bound to boil over eventually. But I was too focused on the daily work, too caught up in teaching the boys and helping Martha keep the ranch running, to pay proper attention to the warning signs. Duke had recovered well enough to take short rides, and I had been using him to help teach the boys proper horsemanship. Jessie turned out to have a natural seat and gentle hands that horses responded to, while Thomas was fearless but sometimes reckless, needing constant reminders to think before acting. Caleb, though, struggled with everything related to horses. He was too rough, too impatient, treating the animals like they were tools instead of living creatures with their own thoughts and feelings. That morning, I had asked him to work with a young mare that Martha wanted broken to saddle. She was a pretty little bay, maybe 3 years old with good bloodlines but a skittish temperament that required patience and a soft touch. Caleb had been working with her for about 20 minutes, and I could see from across the corral that things weren't going well. The mare was dancing at the end of the lead rope, her ears pinned back and her eyes showing white. Caleb was jerking on the rope, trying to force her to stand still, his frustration evident in every line of his body. I walked over to the fence and called out, "Ease up on that rope, Caleb. You're scaring her." "She needs to learn who's boss," Caleb shot back, not looking at me. That's not how it works with horses. You can't bully them into respect. You have to earn it. Yeah? Well, maybe that's not how I want to do it. He jerked the rope again, harder this time, and the mare reared up, pawing the air with her front hooves. Caleb held on, yanking her back down, but I could see the fear in the horse's eyes turning to panic. I climbed over the fence and walked quickly toward them. Caleb, let her go. You're going to hurt her or yourself. I got this, he insisted, but his voice was tight with anger, and something else, maybe shame at being corrected in front of his brothers, who were watching from the barn door. The mare reared again, higher this time, and when she came down, her hoof caught Caleb's shoulder. He cried out and stumbled backward, losing his grip on the rope. The mare bolted to the far side of the corral, trembling and snorting, and Caleb stood there holding his shoulder and glaring at me like it was somehow my fault. You all right? I asked, reaching for his shoulder to check the damage. He jerked away from me. Don't touch me, I'm fine. Let me see. I said I'm fine. His voice cracked on the last word, and suddenly he wasn't a 17-year-old trying to act tough anymore. He was just a scared, angry kid who had lost his father and didn't know how to deal with all the feelings that loss had left behind. Caleb, I said more gently, I'm trying to help you. That's all I've been doing since I got here. But you've got to meet me halfway. You've got to be willing to learn. Learn what? How to be like you? Some drifter who rides in out of nowhere and acts like he knows everything? Caleb's face was flushed, his hands balled into fists at his sides. You don't know anything about us. You don't know what it's been like here trying to keep this place going without Pa. You don't know what it's like to have your mother look at you every day like she's disappointed because you're not good enough to fill his shoes. The words hung in the air between us, raw and honest and painful. Jessie and Thomas had stopped what they were doing and were watching from the barn, their faces pale and tense. Martha had come out onto the porch, alerted by the shouting, and she stood there with one hand pressed to her chest like she was trying to hold something inside. You're right, I said quietly. I don't know what that's like, but I know what it's like to be angry at someone who isn't here anymore, someone you can't yell at or fight with or get answers from. And I know that taking that anger out on everyone around you, including yourself, isn't going to make it hurt any less. What do you know about it? Caleb demanded. You don't have anyone. You're alone because you want to be. You probably never cared about anybody enough to stick around when things got hard. The accusation hit closer to home than he could have known, and I felt something twist in my gut. He was wrong about the reasons, but right about the pattern. I had spent 20 years running from anything that felt like it might tie me down or make me vulnerable. But I had my reasons, even if I couldn't explain them to an angry 17-year-old boy. Maybe you're right, I said, but I'm here now, and I'm trying to help you. Question is, are you going to let me, or are you going to keep fighting me every step of the way until you get yourself or someone else hurt? Caleb's jaw worked, like he was chewing on words he couldn't quite spit out. Then he turned and stalked away, heading for the gate and climbing over it with his shoulder clearly hurting from where the mare had caught him. He didn't look back, just kept walking until he disappeared around the side of the house. I stood there in the corral with the spooked mare still trembling in the corner and the weight of everyone's eyes on me. Finally, Martha said, Jessie, Thomas, get back to your chores. Mr. Cooper, could you come up to the house, please? I followed her inside, my stomach tight with the certainty that I had just made things worse instead of better. Martha poured 2 cups of coffee and sat down at the kitchen table, gesturing for me to do the same. For a long moment she just looked at me, her expression unreadable. I'm sorry, I said finally. I pushed him too hard. No, you were right. He was handling that horse all wrong, and someone needed to tell him. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. But you need to understand something about Caleb. When his father died, he decided he had to be the man of the family, 12 years old, and he put that burden on himself before I could tell him he didn't have to. He's been carrying it ever since, and every time he makes a mistake or can't do something right, he feels like he's failing his father's memory. That's a heavy load for anyone to carry, let alone a kid. It is. And the truth is, I've let him carry it because I needed the help. I needed him to be strong and capable and reliable because I couldn't run this place alone and he was the oldest. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that he's still just a boy. Still learning, still hurting, still trying to figure out who he is without his father here to show him. She looked at me over the rim of her cup. He said something just now that I don't think he realized was true. He said I look at him like I'm disappointed. And God help me, maybe I do. Not because he's not good enough, he's better than I have any right to expect, but because every time I look at him, I see his father, and it reminds me of what we lost. What they all lost. That's not your fault, isn't it? I'm their mother. I'm supposed to protect them from pain, not add to it. You're human, I said. You're doing the best you can with what you've got. That's all anyone can do. Martha was quiet for a moment, then said, he needs time, and he needs to know that he doesn't have to be perfect, that making mistakes doesn't mean he's letting anyone down. Can you give him that? I can try. That's all I'm asking. I found Caleb an hour later, sitting on a rock outcropping about a quarter-mile from the house overlooking the creek. He didn't turn around when I approached, but his shoulders tensed, letting me know he knew I was there. You followed me, he said. Your mother was worried. I'm fine. That shoulder says otherwise. I sat down on a nearby rock, not too close, but not so far away that we couldn't talk. You should let me look at it. Make sure nothing's broken. Why do you care? Because I'm not trying to make things harder for you, Caleb. I know it might feel that way, but I'm really not. He finally turned to look at me, and I saw that his eyes were red-rimmed, whether from anger or tears I couldn't tell. Why are you here, really? My mother says you're just passing through, that you'll leave as soon as your horse is healed. So why bother teaching us anything? Why not just move on like you obviously want to? It was a fair question, and one I had been asking myself more and more lately. Why was I still here, when Duke was healthy enough to ride, and there was nothing tying me to this place except a promise I hadn't really made? I don't know, I admitted. Maybe because your mother needs help and I'm able to give it. Maybe because you boys remind me of myself at your age. Angry and lost, and trying to figure out how to survive in a world that doesn't make any sense. Or maybe because this is the first place in 20 years that's felt like somewhere I could stop running. Caleb studied my face like he was trying to decide if I was telling the truth. What are you running from? Mistakes, bad choices, people I let down. I looked out over the valley, at the creek running silver in the afternoon light. Your mother said something earlier that made me think. She said she looks at you and sees your father, and it reminds her of what you all lost. I think maybe I look at you and see myself, and it reminds me of what I never had. What do you mean? My father died when I was 8. Ranch accident. My mother tried to keep things together, but she couldn't do it alone, and I was too young to be much help. We lost the ranch, and she took work wherever she could find it. Cooking, cleaning, whatever paid. She died when I was 15, worked herself to death trying to keep us fed and clothed. After that, I was on my own, and I've been on my own ever since. It was more than I had told anyone in years, and saying it out loud made my chest feel tight. Caleb was quiet, processing this information, and I could see him trying to reconcile the image of me as some all-knowing drifter with the reality of a kid who had lost his parents and never really recovered. That's why you know how to do everything, he said slowly, because you had to learn or you wouldn't survive. That's right, and I made a lot of mistakes along the way. Hurt people who didn't deserve it, including myself. Spent 20 years thinking that if I just kept moving, kept running, I wouldn't have to face any of it. I looked at him directly. Don't do what I did, Caleb. Don't let your pain turn you into someone you don't want to be. You've got brothers who look up to you, a mother who loves you, and a home worth fighting for. That's more than a lot of people ever get. But what if I'm not good enough? What if I can't be what they need me to be? Then you learn. You get better. You ask for help when you need it instead of pretending you have all the answers. That's what being a man really means, not being perfect, but being willing to keep trying even when it's hard. Caleb was quiet for a long time, staring out at the valley. Finally he said, "My shoulder hurts like hell. Let me see it." This time he didn't pull away when I reached for him. I carefully checked his shoulder, probing for breaks or dislocations. Nothing was broken, but there was already a deep bruise forming where the mare's hoof had caught him. It would be sore for a while, but he would heal. "You'll live," I said, "but you need to be more careful. Horses are big and strong, and they can hurt you without meaning to if you're not paying attention. I know, I wanted to prove I could do it myself, show Ma that I could handle things. Your mother already knows you can handle things. What she needs is for you to learn to handle them the right way, so you don't end up getting hurt or killed, trying to be something you're not ready to be yet." We sat there for a while longer, not talking, just watching the shadows lengthen across the valley. Finally, Caleb stood up, wincing as the movement pulled at his bruised shoulder. "I'm sorry," he said, "for what I said earlier, about you being a drifter who doesn't care about anyone. It's all right. Some of it was probably true anyway. Maybe, but you're here now and you're trying. That counts for something." We walked back to the house together, and I noticed that Caleb walked a little closer to me than he had before, like maybe I wasn't quite the enemy he had thought I was. Martha was waiting on the porch, and the relief on her face when she saw us was almost painful to witness. That evening at supper, the tension from earlier had dissipated somewhat. Caleb was quiet but not hostile, and his brothers seemed to take their cues from him, relaxing as they realized the crisis had passed. Martha served up a venison stew that was the best thing I had eaten in months, and afterward we all sat on the porch, while Thomas practiced his roping, and Jessie read aloud from a battered copy of Treasure Island. Later, when the boys had gone to bed and Martha and I were the only ones still up, she said quietly, "Thank you. For whatever you said to him out there, he came back different somehow. I just told him the truth about myself, about what it means to keep trying, even when you're scared you're not good enough. That's a hard lesson to learn." She looked at me in the lamplight, her expression thoughtful. "You're a good man, Cooper. Better than you give yourself credit for." "I'm just a man," I said, "making it up as I go, same as everyone else. Maybe, but you're here, and that's what matters." The next morning, Caleb was up before anyone else, already mucking out stalls when I got to the barn. He looked up when I came in, and something passed between us. Not quite friendship yet, but maybe the beginning of understanding. "I want to try again with that mare," he said. "But this time will you show me how to do it right?" "Be happy to." We spent the morning working with the bay mare, and this time Caleb listened when I explained how to read her body language, how to give her space when she needed it, and gentle pressure when she was ready to accept it. He was patient in a way I hadn't seen from him before, willing to take his time and let the horse come to him, instead of trying to force the issue. By midday, the mare was accepting a halter and letting Caleb lead her around the corral without any fuss. It was just a small step in the breaking process, but it was progress, and I could see the pride in Caleb's face when he realized what he had accomplished. "That's good work," I told him. "You've got the patience for this if you let yourself use it." "Thanks." He stroked the mare's neck, his touch gentle now instead of rough. "And Cooper, thanks for sticking around. I know I haven't made it easy." "Nothing worth doing is easy," I said. "Your father probably told you that." "He did. A lot, actually. I just forgot somewhere along the way." Over the next few days, something shifted in the dynamic of the ranch. Caleb was less defensive, more willing to listen and learn. Jessie opened up more, asking questions and offering his own observations about the work we were doing. Even Thomas, who had always been the most willing student, seemed to gain confidence, taking on tasks he had previously shied away from. And Martha. Martha seemed lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She smiled more, laughed at Thomas's jokes, and sometimes I would catch her watching her sons with an expression that was equal parts love and relief. As for me, I found myself thinking less about leaving and more about staying. Duke was fully healed, strong enough to carry me wherever I wanted to go, but every morning when I woke up, I found reasons to delay departure. One more fence to mend, one more lesson to teach, one more day in this hidden valley that had somehow become the first real home I had known since I was a boy. I knew it couldn't last forever. Nothing good ever did in my experience, but for now, for this moment, I was content to be exactly where I was, teaching 3 boys how to be men, and trying to remember how to be one myself. The rain that had been threatening finally came that night, a gentle, steady drumming on the roof that lulled me to sleep, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I didn't dream about running. I dreamed about staying, about building something that would last beyond tomorrow, about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, I had finally found a place where my ghosts couldn't follow. It was a good dream. And when I woke to another morning at Callahan Ranch, I realized that for the first time in 20 years, I was looking forward to what came next instead of dreading it. That was worth more than I could have imagined. The trouble rode in on a Tuesday morning in early October, when the aspens on the canyon walls had turned gold and the air carried the sharp bite of coming winter. I was teaching the boys how to shoe a horse. All 4 of us crowded around Duke in the barn when we heard riders approaching. Not just 1 or 2, but several. The sound of multiple horses moving at a deliberate pace that suggested people who weren't in a hurry because they didn't have to be. Martha heard it too. She came out of the house drying her hands on her apron, her face going tight when she saw the dust cloud coming down the canyon trail. "Boys," she called, her voice carefully controlled, "get inside the house, now." "But Caleb started. "Now, Caleb." Something in her tone made all 3 boys move without further argument. They filed into the house, though I could see them watching through the windows. Martha walked over to where I was standing by the barn, and I noticed she had tucked a small revolver into her apron pocket. "You expecting trouble?" I asked quietly. I'm always expecting trouble when Garrett Hawthorne pays a visit, she said. And that's his paint stallion in the lead. 5 riders came into the ranch yard, spreading out in a loose semicircle that was casual but also strategic, making it hard for anyone to cover all of them at once. The man in the center was in his early 50s, broad-shouldered and well-fed, wearing expensive clothes that were too clean for honest ranch work. His hat was black felt with a silver band, and his boots had silver conchos that caught the morning sun. Everything about him spoke of money and the kind of confidence that comes from never having been told no. "Martha," he said, touching his hat brim in a gesture that might have been polite if his eyes hadn't been calculating the worth of everything they touched. "Been a while since we talked." "Not long enough, Garrett," Martha replied. "What brings you all the way out here? Can't a neighbor pay a friendly visit?" His gaze shifted to me, taking in my worn clothes and the way I stood with my hand resting casually near my gun belt. "Don't believe we've met. Garrett Hawthorne, owner of the Double H spread." "Cooper," I said, not offering my first name or my hand. "Cooper." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You Martha's new hand? Heard she took in a drifter a few weeks back." "News travels fast," Martha said. "Even all the way out here where we like our privacy." "Privacy?" Hawthorne shifted in his saddle, making the leather creak. "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about, Martha. See, I've been thinking about your situation here. Widow woman trying to run a ranch with 3 boys who aren't near old enough to be much real help, and it occurs to me that you might be interested in selling. We've had this conversation before, Garrett. The answer's still no. Now hear me out." He held up a hand like he was being reasonable. "This valley of yours, it's prime grazing land. Good water, natural shelter, access to the trail that runs through to Cedar Springs. My cattle could use this range, and I'd be willing to pay fair price for it. More than fair, considering how hard it must be for you to keep this place going without a man to help." "I have men to help," Martha said, gesturing to the house where I knew the boys were watching. "My sons are capable, and Mr. Cooper here has been teaching them what they need to know." Hawthorne's eyes flicked to me again, this time with more interest. "That so? Well, no disrespect to Mr. Cooper, but he's just one man, and teaching boys ranch work isn't the same as having grown men to run the place. What happens when Cooper here moves on? Because drifters always do, eventually. You going to keep hiring strangers and hoping they're honest? Or are you going to accept that this valley is too much for you to handle alone?" "The lady said no," I said, keeping my voice level. "Seems like that should be answer enough." One of Hawthorne's men, a lean gun hand with a scar across his cheek, straightened in his saddle. "Nobody asked you, Drifter." "Easy, Carson," Hawthorne said, though his tone suggested he didn't really mind the confrontation. "Mr. Cooper here is just doing his job protecting the boss lady. Can't fault him for that." He turned back to Martha. "I'm trying to be neighborly here, Martha, but you need to understand. This valley can't stay cut off from the rest of the range forever. I've got cattle that need grazing, and there's only so much land to go around. One way or another, things are going to change." "Is that a threat, Garrett?" "It's a fact. Now I'm hoping we can settle this business-like, with you taking my money and relocating somewhere easier for a woman in your position. But if you're determined to stay—" He let the sentence trail off, the implication clear. Martha's hand moved toward her apron pocket, and I saw Hawthorne's men tense. The situation was about to turn ugly fast, and I needed to diffuse it before someone did something they'd regret. "Mr. Hawthorne," I said, stepping forward just enough to draw attention back to me, "seems to me you've said your piece, and Mrs. Callahan has given you her answer. Might be time for you and your men to head on back to your own spread before this conversation turns into something nobody wants." The scarred gun hand, Carson, laughed. "You going to make us leave, Drifter? You and what army?" I didn't respond to the taunt, just kept my eyes on Hawthorne. He was the one making the decisions here, and he was smart enough to know that pushing this confrontation right now, on Martha's land with witnesses, would be a mistake. He could afford to be patient. "You're right, Mr. Cooper," Hawthorne said finally. "We should be going, but Martha, you think about what I said. This valley's too good to waste, and you're running out of time to make the smart choice." He touched his hat brim again. "We'll be seeing you." They rode out the way they came, taking their time about it, and I noticed Carson looking back twice, his eyes on me both times. Martha didn't relax until they were out of sight around the canyon bend, and then she sagged a little, suddenly looking older and more tired. "That's been going on for 2 years," she said quietly, "ever since he expanded his operation and decided he needed this valley for his cattle. At first it was just offers to buy, always lower than the land's worth but dressed up like he was doing me a favor. Then it started getting more aggressive, Cattle breaking through fences, supplies going missing from the barn, strange riders hanging around the edges of my property. "Why haven't you gone to the law?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Garrett Hawthorne owns the sheriff in Cedar Springs, along with half the town council. They're not going to help me against him. And even if they would, by the time I rode 30 miles to town and 30 miles back with help, Hawthorne could do whatever he wanted here." The boys came out of the house, Caleb in the lead with his jaw set and his hands balled into fists. "We should have fought them, Ma. We could have run them off." "And then what?" Martha asked. "They come back with more men and people get hurt, maybe killed. Is that what you want?" "I want them to leave us alone," Caleb said, his voice breaking slightly. "I want to stop being scared every time someone rides up." Martha pulled him into a hug, even though he was taller than her now, and tried to resist. "I know, baby, I know. But we're going to handle this smart, not with guns blazing like some dime novel." I looked at the canyon trail where Hawthorne and his men had disappeared, thinking about the gun hand with the scar and the way he had looked at me. I had seen men like that before, hired killers who did their employers' dirty work for a price. If Hawthorne was bringing men like that to a simple ranch visit, it meant he was done being patient and ready to escalate. "Martha," I said, "how many men does Hawthorne have working for him?" "Maybe 20, last I heard. Most of them legitimate ranch hands, but at least 4 or 5 who are there for other reasons. And you've got 3 boys, me, and whatever you can do with that pocket pistol." That about sums it up. I thought about Duke in the barn, strong enough now to carry me wherever I wanted to go. I thought about the trail that led out of this valley, about all the places I could be that weren't here dealing with someone else's trouble. I thought about how easy it would be to saddle up and ride away, let Martha and her boys figure out their own solution to the problem of Garrett Hawthorne. And then I thought about Caleb's voice breaking when he said he was tired of being scared, about Jesse's quiet competence and Thomas's quick smile, about Martha who had saved my life and Duke's without asking for anything in return. I thought about the past few weeks, teaching the boys and learning to sleep without one eye open, starting to believe that maybe I could be more than just a man running from his past. "All right," I said, "here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to teach the boys how to defend this place properly, not just with guns, though that's part of it, but with smart tactics and preparation. Second, we're going to make it clear to Hawthorne that this valley isn't going to be an easy target. And third, we're going to find out exactly what he's planning so we can be ready when he makes his move." "That sounds like you're planning to stay," Martha said softly. "For now, at least, until we get this sorted out." Caleb looked at me with something approaching hope in his eyes. "You really think we can stand up to Hawthorne?" "I think if we're smart and work together, we can make it expensive enough for him that he'll decide it's not worth the trouble. But it means everyone does their part and follows orders without argument. Can you do that?" All 3 boys nodded, and I saw Martha's eyes glisten with tears she refused to let fall. Over the next week, we turned Callahan Ranch into a fortress. I taught the boys how to watch for riders approaching, how to use the high ground of the canyon walls for defense, where to position themselves if shooting started. We built barricades that could be quickly moved into place across the main approach to the house, and I showed them how to use the barn and outbuildings as cover and firing positions. I also taught them properly how to shoot, not just at targets, but in the situations they might actually face. Shooting from cover, shooting while moving, coordinating fire so someone was always reloading while others kept up suppressing fire. Caleb was a decent shot, but too eager, needing to learn patience. Jesse was methodical and steady, his best quality in a fight. Thomas surprised everyone by being the best natural marksman of the 3, able to hit targets at distances that impressed even me. Martha proved to be no stranger to firearms herself. She could handle a rifle and pistol both, and she had a cold-blooded calm under pressure that came from years of frontier life. Together, we drilled until everyone knew their roles and positions by heart. But I also knew that preparation only went so far. At some point, Hawthorne was going to make his move, and we needed to know when and how, which meant someone needed to do some scouting. On a cold morning, 10 days after Hawthorne's visit, I saddled Duke before dawn and told Martha I was riding out to get the lay of the land around the valley. She didn't argue, just made me promise to be careful and back before dark. I rode out through the canyon and up into the high country where I could see for miles in every direction. From up there, I could make out the Double H Ranch about 15 miles to the east, a sprawling operation with multiple buildings and corrals. Through my field glasses, I counted at least a dozen men moving around the yard, and I spotted Carson, the scarred gun hand, talking with 3 others near the barn. I spent the day watching and making mental notes, how many men Hawthorne had, what weapons I could see, what the terrain looked like between his place and Martha's Valley. By late afternoon, I had learned two important things. First, Hawthorne was definitely planning something, bringing in more men than any normal ranch operation needed. Second, those men were well armed and looked like they knew how to use their weapons. I was about to head back when I saw riders leaving the Double H, 6 of them heading west towards Cedar Springs. On a hunch, I followed at a distance, keeping to the high ground where I could watch without being seen. They rode straight to town and tied up outside the sheriff's office, confirming what Martha had said about Hawthorne owning the law. I watched long enough to see money change hands between Carson and a man wearing a badge, then headed back to the valley as the sun was setting. Martha was waiting on the porch, and I could see the relief on her face when I rode in. "Learn anything useful?" she asked as I unsaddled Duke. "Hawthorne's getting ready for something. He's got too many men for normal ranch work, and he's paying off the sheriff. Whatever he's planning, it's going to happen soon." "How soon?" "Days, not weeks. We need to be ready." That night we had a family meeting around the kitchen table, something Martha said they hadn't done since her husband died. I laid out what I had seen and what I thought it meant, speaking plainly because the boys deserved to know what they were facing. "Hawthorne wants this valley bad enough to use force," I said. "He'll probably come in with enough men to make it look legal, claim there's a boundary dispute or some trumped-up charge, use the sheriff's badge to make it official. Then he'll try to force you off the land, maybe burn you out if you resist." "So what do we do?" Jesse asked quietly. "We make it clear that taking this valley is going to cost more than it's worth. We don't start the fight, but we don't run from it either. We stand our ground and make them regret coming here." Thomas, who had been quiet through most of the meeting, spoke up. "What if they kill us?" It was the question they were all thinking but afraid to ask, and I respected him for having the courage to voice it. "That's a possibility," I said honestly. "Violence is always unpredictable, and there are no guarantees. But here's what I know. Men like Hawthorne, they're used to people backing down. They're used to being bigger and richer and more powerful, and having that be enough to get what they want. When someone stands up to them, really stands up and shows they're willing to fight, it changes the calculation. Sometimes it's enough to make them think twice." "And if it's not enough?" Caleb asked. "Then we fight anyway because some things are worth fighting for. Your home, your family, your right to live without being pushed around by bullies who think might makes right. Your father understood that. That's why he tried to protect that woman and child in Cedar Springs. Even though it cost him his life, he knew some things were worth the risk." Martha reached across the table and took my hand, squeezing it tight. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for staying, for helping us. You could have ridden away weeks ago, but you didn't." "I'm right where I need to be," I said, and realized with some surprise that I meant it. 2 days later, they came. 12 riders, with the sheriff in the lead and Carson and 3 other gun hands flanking him. They rode in at mid-morning, when they knew everyone would be up and working, making their arrival as public and official-looking as possible, but we were ready for them. I had positioned the boys according to our plan, Caleb in the barn loft with a rifle, Jesse behind the water trough with a clear line of sight to the house, Thomas in the house itself covering the back door. Martha stood on the porch with her rifle cradled in her arms, and I stood beside her, my hand resting on my gun belt. The sheriff, a pot-bellied man in his 60s with watery eyes, and a badge that looked like it weighed heavy on him, pulled up at the edge of the yard. "Mrs. Callahan," he called out, "I'm here on official business." "What business would that be, Sheriff Doyle?" Martha called back. "Got a complaint from Mr. Hawthorne that you've been running cattle on land that doesn't belong to you, crossing boundary lines that are clearly marked. He's within his rights to press charges for trespassing and theft." "That's a lie, and you know it, Doyle. I haven't set foot on Hawthorne's land, and neither have my cattle. This is just him trying to use you to do his dirty work." "Now, Martha, you know I don't like being caught in the middle of neighbor disputes, but the law is the law, and if Mr. Hawthorne says you've been trespassing, I have to investigate. That means I need to come take a look at your property, see if there's any evidence. You're not stepping foot on my land without a warrant, and we both know Hawthorne couldn't get one because there's no real complaint. This is harassment, plain and simple." Doyle's face reddened. "You don't want to make this difficult, Martha. I've got men here to enforce the law, and we will do what's necessary." "And I've got men here to protect my property," Martha said. "You want to try forcing your way in, you're welcome to try, but understand that we will defend ourselves and some of your men might not ride back out." Carson moved his horse forward, his hand resting on his gun. "Big talk from a woman and some farmer boys. You really want to test that? I stepped down off the porch, moving into the open where everyone could see me clearly. The lady's not alone, and we're not farmers. You want to find out what happens when you push this? Go ahead and make your move. But know that I've been in range wars before and I've buried better men than you. So ask yourself if Hawthorne's paying you enough to die for his greed. For a long moment, nobody moved. The tension was thick enough to choke on, and I could feel my heart hammering in my chest, the old familiar mix of fear and excitement that came before violence. My hand hovered near my gun, ready to draw if Carson made a move. Finally, Sheriff Doyle cleared his throat. This isn't over, Martha. Hawthorne's not going to just let this go. Let him come himself next time instead of hiding behind a bought badge, Martha said, and tell him Martha Callahan isn't going anywhere. This is my land, and my son's inheritance, and we'll die before we let him take it. The sheriff and his men turned and rode out, but Carson looked back one more time, his eyes promising that this was far from finished. When they were gone, and the dust had settled, I realized I was shaking slightly, the adrenaline working its way through my system. That was close, Martha said, her voice steady, despite the fear I could see in her eyes. That was the easy part, I replied. Next time they'll come harder, and they won't bother with the pretense of law. We bought ourselves some time, but not much. Caleb climbed down from the loft, his face pale but determined. We did good, though, right? We stood up to them. You did, I said. All of you. Your father would be proud. That night none of us slept much. We took turns on watch, waiting for Hawthorne to make his next move, and in the quiet hours before dawn, sitting on the porch with my rifle across my knees and the stars wheeling overhead, I thought about how strange it was that I had found something worth fighting for in this hidden valley. I had spent 20 years avoiding exactly this kind of situation, putting down roots, caring about people, making myself vulnerable by having something to lose. But here I was, ready to face down hired guns and corrupt lawmen for a woman and 3 boys I had known less than 2 months. Maybe Martha was right. Maybe I had been looking for this place, this purpose, longer than I realized. And maybe, just maybe, I was finally ready to stop running and start building something that would last. The sun rose over the canyon walls, painting everything gold and red, and I watched the valley wake up around me. Whatever came next, whatever Hawthorne had planned, we would face it together, and that made all the difference. The attack came 3 nights later, when the moon was new and the valley lay in darkness thick enough to hide an army. But I had been expecting it, and I had made sure we were ready. I was on watch when I heard it, the faint sound of horses moving slowly through the canyon, their hooves wrapped in cloth to muffle the noise. Someone who didn't know this country might have missed it, but I had spent too many years listening for danger to be fooled. I counted at least 8 horses, maybe more, and they were spreading out as they entered the valley, trying to surround the ranch buildings. I slipped inside the house and woke everyone quickly and quietly. Martha and the boys moved to their positions without panic, the weeks of drilling paying off now when it mattered most. Caleb went to the barn loft. Jesse took the fortified position behind the water trough. Thomas moved to the reinforced window in the kitchen that gave him a view of the approach from the canyon. Martha positioned herself upstairs in the bedroom window with her rifle, and I took the porch where I could coordinate and shift as needed. The riders came into the ranch yard slowly, shadows moving through shadows. In the faint starlight I could make out Carson's distinctive silhouette, and I recognized 2 other gun hands from Hawthorne's previous visits. But I didn't see Hawthorne himself. He was the kind of man who sent others to do his dirty work, while he maintained deniability. They had come prepared for a fight. Several men carried torches, unlit but ready, and I knew their plan was to burn us out if we resisted, force the family to run, then claim they had abandoned the property. It was crude but effective, and it had probably worked before on others who couldn't defend themselves. But the Callahans weren't alone anymore. I let them get close enough to commit, to spread out across the yard in a formation that would make it hard for them to support each other. Then I called out, my voice carrying clear through the cold night air. That's far enough, Carson. You and your boys turn around and ride out now while you still can. There was a moment of startled silence, then Carson's laugh echoed across the yard. Well, the drifter's got some spine after all. You really think you can stop us, Cooper? There's 8 of us and 1 of you. Count again, I said. There's 5 of us and we've got you in a crossfire from 3 directions. You light those torches and we start shooting. Some of you will die before you can even reach the buildings. Is Hawthorne paying you enough for that? I heard the distinctive sound of rifle hammers being cocked from the barn loft, the house, and the fortified position by the water trough. The gun hand's horses started to shift nervously, sensing their riders' sudden uncertainty. "You're bluffing," Carson said, but there was less confidence in his voice now. "Try me." I let the steel show in my voice, the cold certainty of a man who had been in this situation before and knew exactly what would happen if they pushed it. "You want a war, Carson? I'll give you one. But understand, you won't be walking away from it. None of you will. So you need to ask yourself if dying for Garrett Hawthorne's greed is really how you want your story to end." For a long moment, nobody moved. I could feel the tension stretching tighter and tighter, like a rope about to snap. My hand rested on my revolver, and I knew that if shooting started, men would die. Maybe me, maybe the boys, but definitely some of Hawthorne's men, and they knew it too. Finally, one of the gun hands spoke up, his voice young and uncertain. "This ain't what we signed on for, Carson. We thought this was going to be easy, scare off a widow and some kids. Nobody said anything about getting killed." "Shut up, Billy," Carson snapped. "No, he's right," another voice said. "I ain't dying for $40 a month and whatever scraps Hawthorne throws us. This is his fight, not ours." I saw Carson's hand move toward his gun, saw the moment when he decided to force the issue rather than back down. I drew and fired in one smooth motion, the sound of my shot cracking through the night like lightning. The torch flew out of Carson's hand, splintering into pieces, and his horse reared and nearly threw him. Before he could recover, rifle shots rang out from the barn, the house, and the water trough, not aimed at men but at the ground near the horses' hooves, kicking up dirt and rock. The horses panicked, several of them bolting, and suddenly, Hawthorne's carefully planned night raid turned into chaos. "Next shots won't miss," I called out. "Get out of here while you can." They broke then, the younger gun hands wheeling their horses and galloping back toward the canyon, their nerve completely gone. Carson tried to rally them, shouting curses and threats, but they weren't listening anymore. Within seconds, only Carson and two others remained, and even they were having trouble controlling their spooked horses. "This isn't over," Carson snarled at me. "Yes, it is," I said flatly. "You go back and tell Hawthorne that this valley isn't for sale, and the next time he sends men here, they won't all ride back out. Tell him Martha Callahan has friends now, and we don't scare easy." Carson looked at me with pure hatred, and I knew I had made an enemy for life, but he also knew he was beaten, at least for tonight. He jerked his horse around and rode after his men, and the two remaining gun hands followed quickly. When the sound of hoofbeats had faded into the distance, I heard Martha's voice from the upstairs window. "Everyone all right?" "We're fine, Ma," Caleb called from the barn. "Jesse?" "Good here." "Thomas?" "I'm okay." The boy's voice was shaking slightly, the adrenaline and fear catching up with him now that the danger had passed. I holstered my gun and realized my hands were trembling. It had been a long time since I had been in a shooting situation, and the old fear was still there, lurking beneath the surface. But we had done it. We had faced down Hawthorne's men and sent them running. Martha came down from upstairs and walked out onto the porch, and before I could say anything, she wrapped her arms around me and held on tight. I stood there awkwardly for a moment, not sure what to do, then slowly put my arms around her and held her while she shook with reaction. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for being here, for teaching them, for standing with us." "I wouldn't have been anywhere else," I said, and realized it was true. The boys emerged from their positions, all three of them talking at once, their voices high with excitement and relief. They had faced real danger and come through it, and I could see the change in them, the way they stood straighter, met each other's eyes with new confidence, understood something about themselves they hadn't known before. We didn't sleep the rest of that night. Instead, we kept watch in shifts, waiting to see if Carson would come back with reinforcements. But the valley stayed quiet, and when dawn finally broke over the canyon walls, painting everything in shades of gold and pink, I knew we had won more than just a single confrontation. 3 days later, a rider came to the valley. Not one of Hawthorne's gun hands, but a lawyer from Cedar Springs, wearing a suit and carrying a leather satchel. Martha met him on the porch, and I stood beside her, ready for whatever trick this was. "Mrs. Callahan," the lawyer said, removing his hat respectfully, "my name is Samuel Wright. I represent the Territorial Land Office, and I've come about a matter concerning your property boundaries." "If this is another scheme from Hawthorne," Martha started. "It's not." Wright pulled papers from his satchel. 3 days ago, I received an anonymous report, though I suspect it came from some of Mr. Hawthorne's former employees, regarding certain irregularities in property claims and land surveys. Upon investigation, I discovered that your deed is completely valid and properly filed. while Mr. Hawthorne's claim to the adjoining rangeland is questionable at best. He spread the papers on the porch railing, showing survey maps and legal documents. It appears that when Hawthorne expanded his operation 5 years ago, he did so by claiming government land that had never been properly surveyed or registered. That land has now been surveyed properly, and I'm pleased to inform you that it actually extends your property boundaries by approximately 500 acres to the east. Martha stared at the maps, then at Wright. I don't understand. Why are you telling me this? Because land theft is illegal, Mrs. Callahan, regardless of who commits it, and because I've been hearing things. Stories about harassment, intimidation, men with guns trying to force honest people off their land. The territorial government takes such matters seriously. He handed her an official-looking document. This is a cease and desist order against Garrett Hawthorne and all his employees. If he or anyone working for him sets foot on your property without permission, he can be arrested and prosecuted. Furthermore, his questionable land claims are under formal investigation. How did this happen? I asked, because this kind of legal intervention didn't come out of nowhere. Wright smiled slightly. Let's just say that when certain gun hands rode back to Cedar Springs 3 nights ago and started talking in the saloon about what happened here, some people started asking questions about why a successful rancher needed hired killers, questions about where his land claims came from, questions that led to other questions, until the whole rotten structure started to collapse. He tipped his hat to Martha. You've got friends in Cedar Springs, Mrs. Callahan, more than you might think, people who remember your husband and respect what he stood for, people who are tired of Hawthorne using his money and influence to bully everyone around him. He glanced at me, and people who were impressed by a drifter who stood up for a widow and her boys when nobody else would. After Wright left, Martha sat down on the porch steps and started to cry. Not tears of sadness, but of relief so profound it overwhelmed her. The boys gathered around, and for a few minutes they just held each other, a family that had faced the worst and survived. I started to slip away, give them privacy, but Caleb called out, "Cooper, wait. You're part of this too." And somehow I was, pulled into their circle like I belonged there, like I had always belonged there. We sat together on that porch for a long time, not talking much, just being present with each other, and with the knowledge that we had won something important. Over the following weeks, word spread about what had happened at Callahan Ranch. Other small ranchers who had been intimidated by Hawthorne found their courage and started speaking up. The investigation into his land claims expanded, and suddenly the man who had seemed so powerful was fighting just to keep what he legitimately owned. He never came near Martha's Valley again. As winter settled over the canyon country, I found myself falling into a routine that felt less like temporary work and more like a life. I taught the boys everything I knew about ranching, hunting, tracking, survival. They soaked it up like dry ground after rain, growing more capable and confident with each passing day. Caleb lost most of his anger, channeling it instead into becoming the kind of man his father would have been proud of, strong but not harsh, determined but not rigid. Jesse came out of his shell, revealing a sharp mind and natural leadership that suggested he might be the real manager of the ranch someday. And Thomas, the youngest, became like a shadow to me, following me around and asking endless questions, his quick smile and eager nature reminding me what it was like to be young and full of hope. As for Martha, something changed between us. It started with long conversations on the porch after the boys had gone to bed, talking about everything and nothing. Then came the casual touches, her hand on my arm when she passed me something, my hand on her back when we stood together watching the boys work. Small things, but they added up to something larger, something neither of us quite knew how to name. One evening in late November, after the first real snow had fallen and the valley looked like something from a picture book, Martha asked me to walk with her down to the creek. We stood there in the cold air, watching the water run dark and fast between banks of white snow, and she said, "You're going to leave in the spring, aren't you?" I wanted to lie, to tell her I would stay forever, but she deserved honesty. "I don't know. Part of me wants to stay, but I've been running for so long I'm not sure I remember how to stand still." "What are you running from?" She looked at me with those storm cloud eyes that saw too much. So I told her about the ranch I had lost, the people I had let down, the guilt I carried for not being good enough or strong enough or smart enough to save the things that mattered, about the woman I had loved once who had died because I couldn't protect her from a fever that swept through the camp where we were working, about the friends who had trusted me and ended up dead because of decisions I had made, about all the ways I had failed and all the reasons I had convinced myself I was better off alone. Martha listened without interrupting, and when I was finished, she said quietly, "You can't run from grief, Cooper. It follows you wherever you go. The only way through it is to stop running and feel it. Let it hurt until it doesn't hurt as much anymore. Let people in even though you might lose them. Love things even though they might break your heart." "How?" I asked. "How do you do that after you've lost everything?" "By remembering that you're still alive, and that means you still get to choose. You can choose to keep running, keep being alone, keep punishing yourself for things that were never your fault to begin with. Or you can choose to stay here, be part of something. Let yourself have the life you deserve." She took my hand, her fingers cold against mine. "My boys need you. This ranch needs you." She paused, then added softly, "I need you." I looked at her standing there in the snow, strong and beautiful, and offering me something I had thought was lost to me forever. A home, a family, a future that extended beyond the next horizon. Every instinct I had told me to pull away, to protect myself from the inevitable pain of caring too much. But another voice, quieter and deeper, asked what I was protecting myself for if I never let myself live. "I'm not good at this," I said finally. "At staying, at being what people need me to be." "Neither am I," Martha said. "I'm making it up as I go, same as you, but I'd rather figure it out together than alone. What do you say?" What did I say? I said yes. Not to forever, because forever was too big and scary to promise. But yes to staying through the winter. Yes to seeing what spring brought. Yes to trying, to letting myself care, to building something instead of running from everything. We kissed there by the creek, with snow falling around us and the valley dark and peaceful beyond. And for the first time in 20 years, I felt something like peace settle into my chest, where the restlessness used to be. Christmas came, and Martha insisted we celebrate properly. The boys cut down a small pine tree, and we decorated it with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments that Thomas made with surprising artistic skill. We roasted a wild turkey I had shot, and Martha made pie from dried apples, and we sat around the table telling stories and laughing until our sides hurt. That night, after the boys had gone to bed, Martha gave me a present, a new shirt she had sewn herself, better quality than anything I had owned in years. I gave her a carved wooden box I had made during the long evenings in the bunkhouse, with a simple pattern of oak leaves on the lid. She ran her fingers over the carving and smiled, and I knew I had given her something that mattered. "I love you," she said simply, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I had thought those words would terrify me, would send me running for Duke and the trail. But instead I found myself saying, "I love you too," and meaning it with everything I had. Winter passed into spring, and the canyon walls turned green with new growth. The boys had grown in ways that went beyond just height. They were capable now, confident in their skills and their place in the world. Caleb could run the ranch operation as well as any grown man. Jesse had a gift for reading weather and land that suggested he would be a successful rancher himself someday. And Thomas, at 14, could outrope and outshoot most adults. One morning in early April, I walked out to check on Duke and found myself thinking about the trail, about all the places I could go if I saddled up and rode out. The restlessness was still there, that old familiar itch to keep moving, but it was quieter now, more manageable. I stood there with my hand on Duke's neck, feeling the solid warmth of him, and I realized something had changed. I wasn't running anymore. I was choosing, and what I chose was to stay. That evening at supper, I said to Martha and the boys, "I've been thinking this ranch needs more help than just me coming and going. It needs a real partner, someone committed to making it work for the long term." Martha's eyes widened slightly, hope and fear mixing in her expression. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to stay. Not as hired help, but as more than that, if you'll have me." Caleb broke into a grin. "Are you asking our mother to marry you?" "I suppose I am. If she's willing to put up with an old drifter who's still figuring out how to be the kind of man worth staying for." Martha stood up, walked around the table, and pulled me to my feet. "Yes," she said firmly. "Yes, absolutely yes." The boys cheered, and Thomas actually whooped with joy. We all embraced there in the kitchen, a family that had been broken but was finding a way to be whole again, not by replacing what was lost, but by building something new from the pieces that remained. We were married in June, in a simple ceremony at the ranch with neighbors and friends from Cedar Springs attending. The boys stood up with us, and even old Samuel Wright came to witness the union and bring a case of wine to celebrate. It was a small wedding, but perfect in its simplicity, and when I kissed Martha under the cottonwood trees by the creek, I felt like I had finally found what I had been searching for all those years on the trail. Life settled into a rhythm after that. We worked the ranch together, all 5 of us now a real family. We expanded the operation gradually, buying more cattle, improving the buildings, making the valley into something prosperous and enduring. The boys grew into men who made their father's memory proud and their mother's sacrifice worthwhile. Caleb eventually married a girl from Cedar Springs and built his own house on the eastern section of the property. Jesse went to agricultural college and came back with new ideas about ranching that made the operation even more successful. Thomas discovered he had a gift for breaking horses and started a side business training mounts for other ranchers. As for Martha and me, we built a life together that was everything I had never thought I would have. Partnership, love, purpose, home. We had hard years and good years, losses and victories, but we faced them all together. And every night when I lay down next to her in our bed, I thanked whatever force had brought me to that canyon on the day Duke collapsed, because it had saved more than just my horse's life. Years later, sitting on the porch in the evening light with Martha beside me and grandchildren playing in the yard, I thought about the man I had been when I first rode into this valley, lost, angry, running from everything and toward nothing. I thought about how close I had come to riding away, to missing out on all of this because I was too afraid to stop and let myself be found. "What are you thinking about?" Martha asked, her hand finding mine like it always did. "About how sometimes getting lost is the only way to find where you belong," I said. She smiled and leaned her head on my shoulder. "You were never lost, Cooper. You were just looking for home." And that, I realized, was the truest thing anyone had ever said about me. I hadn't been running away from my past all those years. I had been running toward my future, toward this valley, and this woman, and these boys who had become my sons, toward a life I didn't know I was looking for until I found it. Duke lived another 10 years, eventually passing peacefully in his stall surrounded by the family he had brought me to. We buried him on a hill overlooking the valley, and I carved a simple marker that read, "Duke, good horse, better friend." The boys came with me to say goodbye, and we stood there together remembering the day he had collapsed and everything that had followed. "Guess he knew what he was doing," Caleb said quietly, "bringing you here." "Guess he did," I agreed. Sometimes on clear nights I still felt that old restlessness stir in my chest, that whisper of the trail calling me to keep moving, keep searching, keep running. But now I knew how to answer it. I would walk down to the creek with Martha, or help Thomas with a difficult horse, or sit with Caleb and talk about running the ranch, and the restlessness would fade into something softer. Not contentment exactly, but acceptance of where I was and who I had become. I was Daniel Cooper, husband and father and rancher, living in a hidden valley in the canyon country with the people I loved. I had stopped running, stopped hiding, stopped being alone. And though the journey to get here had been long and hard and full of mistakes, I wouldn't have changed a single mile of it, because every trail leads somewhere if you stay on it long enough, and sometimes, if you're very lucky, it leads you home.